You are now listening to a podcast made in collaboration with the Copenhagen College Radio.
Merry Christmas, everyone, and welcome to episode 40 of the Social Media and Politics podcast, bringing you expert insights into how social media is changing the political game. I'm your host, Michael Pacetta, political scientist at the University of Copenhagen. Remember that you can follow us on Twitter at SMNP Podcast and also check out the Facebook page, facebook.com/Social Media and Politics Podcast. So, Merry Christmas, everyone. Happy Hanukkah. Happy Kwanzaa. Any others we're missing out?
No, just say happy holidays.
Happy holidays. Joining me in studio, if you're a listener to the pod, you will definitely remember this voice. This is the voice of Dr. Anamaria Dutceac Segesten. She's assistant professor in European Studies at Lund University and vice chair of
the Center for European Studies. It's all about European studies. If you want anything about Europe, that's me. I am concentrated on this topic. But thank you for having me, and it's very nice to be here, and I'm very ready to discuss with you the year in review, social media and politics.
So this is our second annual now, or it's the second annual?
Second, yeah.
Second annual. So if you haven't listened to our 2016 review, we talked a lot about bots and fake news and the topics that were of the time, the U.S. presidential election. And I went back and listened to it recently, and still very relevant. So go ahead and check it out. But in this episode, we're going to be looking to 2017 and following the same format where we each have picked three topics or three gifts that we are going to unwrap as the episode moves forward.
In the Christmas spirit, there'll be three gifts.
So shall we go ahead and go right into number one?
Number one, yes, the gift I want to give the audience and to you, Michael, of course, is an idea that occurred to me during the scandal of the so-called Russian interference in the American presidential elections of last year. But the phenomenon that I'm thinking about is actually larger than the event that has been now in focus. And the name of it, as I named it, is the transnationalization of social media. And I guess you want me to explain what I mean by that.
Go ahead.
Well, in a nutshell, I would say that in the social media landscape, there is no way to ascertain where a certain user, company, or a phenomenon is located. It is, in a sense, a borderless space, and everybody kind of knows this. It's not a shocking news. But the interesting part is that nobody has conceptually analyzed what does it really mean that there are no borders in the social media space. Basically, it can mean, for example, that Russian companies, Russian private citizens, or any other citizens for that matter, for Brazil or Indonesia or South Africa, whatnot, they can participate in the debates that pertain to other nations' politics. There's nothing stopping them. And I think for most of our listeners, it would be also quite absurd that there should be some form of certification. Please show your social security number if you want to participate in a debate about the fate of American politics, or your personal number in Sweden if you want to have an opinion about what's going on in Swedish politics. So this debate is accessible to everyone, but can also theoretically and apparently increasingly practically can be manipulated or affected by people that do not have the right to vote.
So it's interesting you bring up this idea of a social security number or a person number, because I was giving a lecture, and after the lecture, a student asked me exactly that. Why can't we use our person numbers or our identifiable, government numbers that you're assigned at birth in order to log into a Facebook account?
Well, I believe there's some governments who certainly want to do that. I suppose a lot of the more controlling or authoritarian government would love to know exactly who's doing what. That would give another surveillance level, if you wish, to that. But I think it defeats the purpose of social media as being this kind of a freer space for exchange. And going beyond the actual, so to say, limits of the technology, I'm sure if you wanted to, you could implement a barrier with your social security number, login or not. But the interesting part is that you shouldn't do that. And that because we live in a globalized world, the social media space should remain transnational in principle because the concerns of all citizens can be thus expressed. And it is so that most citizens are concerned about global issues like climate change, for example, or about issues that pertain, say, to American politics, but that indirectly would also affect them. So in the worst case scenario, and again, I'm not saying this is a likelihood at all, but let's say that there is a nuclear confrontation between the United States and North Korea. This is a global issue. So people around the world are concerned and they want to express that on social media.
And, we've done some research on this idea of the European public sphere. So we have a lot of listeners in Europe, and in academia, there's a lot of interest in, can social media provide a space where citizens from different countries can come together and debate issues about Europe? And there's some features like translation features that assist that type of conversation across borders, across cultures, across languages.
Automated translation, I may also add.
And those have definitely gotten more sophisticated in the past couple years. And people look for Twitter for this, right? Because it's more of an open network. Your message can go, outside your friend network on Twitter by using hashtags. And what's interesting is that not that many Europeans are actually on Twitter, and it's dominated mostly by citizens in Britain. So whether they're still European.
Anglo-Saxon bias.
The Anglo-Saxon bias, which is interesting. So I think the latest stats that I've seen are from 2014. It's hard to track these down. But in 2014, about 65% of the Twitter population was American, and then 7% was British, followed by Canada, Australia, and then the first European country was only 1.5%. So we know that Brits tend to be pretty Eurosceptic, right, as Brexit has shown. So if there is a European public sphere, it's likely to be dominated by British citizens and particularly Eurosceptic British citizens. So I think that's an interesting idea that in terms of transnationalization, not all countries are using the same platforms equally.
No, and some countries are very skeptical in using any platform. Think about Germany in particular, right? There's an inbuilt skepticism historically or based on historical reasons that doesn't see Germany as a major social media player. And again, I don't have the numbers fresh in my mind, but I think the important part is that the French are not super, super active either. But some other nations are, for example, South Korea. South Korea is one of the most active nations worldwide in terms of any kind of social media use. So not just Facebook or Twitter, but also some of their national channels specifically designed for that country. And they are so technically savvy that they can use social media also for political purposes. It has actually played quite a role in the sacking of the president, which also took place not that long ago. It seems like it's forever ago, but it's only half a year ago, I believe.
2017 has been a very interesting year.
Yeah, maybe we'll try to be concise. But yes, I think anyway, just to make my point and to recap, transnationalization, the borderless nature of social media with its good things, the fact that we have almost a global agora for global problems or global issues, but also, and I'm sure you're going to pick up on this later, this idea that the transnational aspect also has like a hole in which all sorts of negative, from a normative point of view, actors can sneak in and change the nature of the debate in another country that is almost like an act of sabotage.
Wonder who you're talking about.
I'm sure you'll have one or two ideas about that.
Yes.
So that was my first gift. My first gift was the idea of transnationalization of social media spaces.
Yes. And I think we also talked about this a bit in our year in review last year, which was basically the dominance of Facebook and now Instagram, where we know there are other social media platforms, for example, in Asia. Like there's a Snapchat equivalent called Snow. There's a WhatsApp equivalent called Line. But it seems that Facebook is aggressively taking steps to stomp out the growth, for example, of Snapchat in those markets, meaning Instagram will likely be the kind of photo sharing app across the world, which enables that transnationalization because everyone's on the same platform. I
think so. The infrastructure is, again, something that both you and I have written about, and something that, of course, emerged in many of our long conversations over the years, is the importance of digital architectures and how they not necessarily condition, that is a very strong word, but they definitely affect what is possible to do as a user from a user point of view online. And the fact that there is a global platform of interaction, Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, that allows for this transnationalization to happen. And I don't mean it to be perceived as it's inevitable. This can definitely be reversed. I think in Turkey, there is actually quite a strong disincentive to use YouTube and Twitter and Facebook. You have to, or at least at some point, you had to use VPN channels in order to log in. And most famously, China, right? There's no China Facebook, but they have their own parallel system of social media communication. And WeChat. You've been to China, right?
I've been to China this year, and I downloaded WeChat. I have a few WeChat friends, and they have a really funny feature called Shake Your Phone.
Shake your phone.
And what you do is you shake your phone, and then it connects you to someone else in the world, probably most likely China, who's also shaking their phone at the same time.
A random connect?
Yeah, a random connect via the phone shake.
And then you can start a chat?
Yeah, you connect, and then you can friend that person and then go from there.
But just because I'm curious, and we don't have to go too much into this, but the infrastructure, because we were talking about it, is it similar? The way it looks, the way it feels, is it something particularly different, or is this like a copy of something you're familiar with? A copy is too strong, but inspiration. It's
like an older version of Facebook in that...
I don't remember anything. I'm updating my own memories as the updates of Facebook come in.
I really didn't use WeChat that much, but it's a lot like you post to a feed, and then you scroll through the feed. It's much more about the feed, I think, than individual profiles.
Okay. So it's kind of different.
Yeah, kind of different. Same logics, right?
But it's interesting. So we have these national platforms like WeChat and the ones you mentioned, Snow, and I believe the Japanese are also pretty good at shaping their own social media. I know in Russia, and you guys had a conversation, right, with one of the guests on the podcast.
Yeah, Sergey, in the episode on character assassination.
Sergey, that's right, and he was mentioning in that episode the Russian national, or this, I would even dare say, the former Soviet space social media channel, which is called Kontakty, if I pronounce it correctly, which means just like keep in touch or something like this, contacts. And that's a special universe, which it has a different kind of features. If I remember from that conversation, that is always public. Almost everything you post there is public.
And all the data is public as well.
Which brings to mind the idea of surveillance and the queeps one would have about having everything public. But anyway, that's a different structure, typical for a specific geographical and cultural area. And that doesn't mean that Russians are not on Facebook. There definitely are, but they are both on Facebook and on this Kontakty. And I think that they prefer a lot of these Kontakty because that's where the schoolmates are. And
yeah, it also has a lot of features that are not on Facebook. So you can do you can build playlists. It's kind of got like a Spotify built in. It does have some added benefits, I think.
Anyway, so transnationalization has its limits, as we just mentioned, but I think it happens, and we could maybe discuss later some of the consequences of that.
Yes.
But maybe it's your turn. It's your turn to give a gift to the listeners.
Yeah, so my first gift, I don't know exactly what to call it, something along the lines of year in review. So I've looked at Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, their year in review reports in terms of what's been the most shared, what's been the most liked. And of course, I was searching for the political aspects in those. And so I want to go through first Facebook, then Twitter, then Instagram, and kind of recap what was actually the most shared content on those platforms. So Facebook, and I'll put a link to these reports in the show notes, they charted basically three phenomenon of 2017. One was people coming together to react and talk about the most important moments that took place around the world. So kind of
transnationalization, just as I was saying before.
Just as you were saying. The second one being when people came together in times of crisis, which there was a lot of natural disasters this year. Right?
Unfortunately, yes, very much so.
And then the third being people using online tools to get together in person, so actual events.
This so much certifies, if I may bring in a little academic reference in this conversation, the connective action thesis. I think Lance Bennett and Alexander Zuckerberg are jubilating reading the Facebook results because it's all about getting together.
Well, I'm going to hide it here. Do you know what the number one global offline meeting point across the world was? Or for what event was it around?
Well, there must be a global event. And I want to say, I really have not read that. I want to say the solar eclipse.
Yes, bingo. Total
Really?
solar eclipse.
Because, I mean, it's this logic of transnationalization. It happened everywhere around the world. So I guess it makes sense.
There were over 20,000 events in more than 80 countries, and the eclipse was a moment that generated interest and attendance from over 3 million people on Facebook events.
Jeez.
So interested and or going, although I think you're automatically signed up to attend a solar eclipse. But what sticks out in this for me is, and something that I'm sure we'll talk about, that's really been picking up in the past couple months, and so the latter part of 2017 is basically women's movements.
Oh, God.
So like the Me Too hashtag. But in terms of when people come together to react and talk about important moments, the top moment of 2017 was International Women's Day.
Really?
And
I must be. So I wasn't prepared for that.
And so for that event, 165 million people generated more than 430 million interactions worldwide. So there's your
fact-checking.
Your transnationalization argument. It came from 190 countries, but 5 countries made up over 50% of the posts. And those 5 countries were U.S., Brazil, India, Mexico, and Argentina.
Not South Korea.
Not South Korea. But what's interesting is that in terms of the connective action or the offline mobilizing event, the biggest one was the solar eclipse, but the second biggest was the Women's March on D.C.
Yes. I mean, my impression, again, you're dedicated a lot more time to do a lot of these fact-checking. I'm mostly interested in general trends this time around, at least. And my feeling was, and my intuition was that Trump-related stuff is definitely if you know, like, if you were to say the year in review, not at an academic level, but at a descriptive level, Trump-related politics.
What else is new? Seems to be the norm these days,
both
2016 and 2017.
So, yes, the Women's March, definitely a big event, and it had reverberations around the world. Just to give a local Scandinavian example, just because we're in Copenhagen, I know for sure, I remember that I was co-opted in all sorts of events saying, yes, you must march in Lund, in Stockholm, in Malmö, in Copenhagen. At the same time, I cannot clothe myself, but it was just an example of this transnational, again, spread of this idea.
I was in Dublin at the time and saw there was a march going on there. So,
in a sense, it's perhaps the very perverse effect, if I may say so, of the Trump White House politics, focusing very much on America, driving an isolationist agenda. But apparently, the more focused on America, the more reverberations abroad, to such an extent that Trump, an American citizen, an American politician, can mobilize to a very large extent, according to what you just said, both on and offline, a very large number of non-American citizens.
Yeah, and so the Women's March was on January 21st, so right around the inauguration, right?
I think it was in
response to it, I believe. And then towards the end of the year, or no, International Women's Day is in
March 1st.
Is March 1st.
No, March 8th. March 8th. Excuse me.
But then we had the Me Too hashtag that really exploded in October. And interestingly, I don't know I was looking for exact numbers of things, but I found a blog post in October, actually a report from Facebook that said 45% of users in the United States had a friend who posted the term Me Too within the first couple days. So 45% of the American Facebook sphere had seen this or had posted about it, not even seen it. So
I think the numbers are basically at least twice as much by now, right? Because this was October. This is basically when the hashtag started. I think Me Too is an amazing phenomenon of this connective action impression. In a sense, I think it brought to the lay people, if you wish, the idea that social media does matter. Heads fall because of social media. Roy Moore lost an election partly because of a campaign mounted against him on the basis of this Me Too mobilization.
And also for the academics listening, and also in terms of Bennett and Segerberg's classic 2012 article, the Me Too hashtag is a great example of a personalized action frame. So the example they give is the 99%. with the Occupy Wall Street movement. We are the 99%. It's a very vague signifier of protest. People would post pictures to fill in their experience of why they are the 99%. Same thing with the Me Too hashtag. So this started, or really went viral with Alyssa Milano.
It started much before that, it must be said, by another person. So it was preceding the scandals by some quite a lot of time. But yes, Alyssa Milano was the rekindling of the hashtag.
Which brings into the role of celebrity, right? On promoting these, putting their weight behind these movements. But you're right in that there was some prior action all year in terms of this movement. So right when the year started in January, there was some violence against women in Bangalore. That started a Yes All Women hashtag.
Yes.
And then you see a peak in these types of hashtags also when there was that letter that was released or something about harassment in tech companies in Silicon Valley.
The Google memo.
The Google memo. So that spiked these hashtags. So there was this kind of undercurrent of activity, and then it just exploded in October with the Me Too movement, which is still going on today.
And again, I think this is basically why I would like to comment some more, not about the content, because there are people that are much more academically trained to deal with the content of Me Too. But in terms of what we do, which is the social media and politics connection, I think it's an excellent opportunity to analyze and to demonstrate the power of social media in affecting actual politics, power relations. Yes.
We've got a comment here saying girl power.
We win.
Social media for the win. Okay, so that was Facebook, more or less. There was a lot about disaster recovery, Hurricane Harvey, earthquakes in Mexico, which are natural disasters, not so much on the politics side. But I want to go into Twitter, which is exactly what you're saying. Who is the most mentioned politician on Twitter?
Yes.
Trump.
No, it is not.
Yeah, it is.
It is?
Yeah.
I thought, anyway, you go. I wrote it down. The most retweeted tweet is actually not Trump's. It's Obama's. Yes, I said it. Okay, this is a partisan thing. No, I'm not saying it's partisan. I want to make sure that our listeners do not feel that we take necessarily a party pre in this. But I am satisfied not necessarily because of ideological purposes, but because I don't like one person to dominate the conversation.
Well, that was the most retweeted tweet,
Yes.
political.
Yes.
But not the most retweeted tweet of 2017.
No, that was not a political tweet, though.
You know what it is?
I have an idea, but you have done the research, so you should just spell it out.
So the second most retweeted tweet was Obama posting a quote from Nelson Mandela.
Yes.
After the violence in Charlottesville. The number one most retweeted tweet, and this is great, it is a guy called Carter Wilkerson. He's just a layman, as you would say.
A layman.
And he tweeted Wendy's, "Yo, Wendy's."
Wendy's, the fast food chain?
The fast food chain, popularized by not the double stack. Anyways, the Frosty. Anyway, so he tweeted, "Yo, Wendy's, how many retweets for a year of free chicken nuggets?"
Oh my God, this guy must love free chicken nuggets or nuggets altogether.
And Wendy's replies, 18 million?
18 million?
And he says, consider it done. So he pinned that up on his page and with a screenshot of the tweet and said, help me please, a man needs his nugs. And he got 3.6 million retweets. So shy of 18 million, but Wendy's did honor that. And he has a year's worth of free chicken nuggets at Wendy's.
If I may comment also very, very in a side way, but this is a fantastic publicity for Wendy's. This is free publicity. Can you imagine that 3,640,000 people knew about Wendy's chicken nuggets because one random person decided to make it a big deal? This is free. I mean, this is called in some other academic terms. We're mixing high and low terms here, and this is the high end. This is this kind of labor, the user free labor that is involved in social media activity.
Citizen-initiated campaigning.
Yeah. I think this is definitely, I mean, can you believe it that a person who loved, this person's certified for the quality of Wendy's chicken nuggets. So 3.6 million people also, in a sense, vouched for that.
And so what's interesting is I went and I looked at his page He's since been a verified Twitter user, which I'm a little bit sour about because they rejected my request for the podcast. But so Carter Wilkerson is now a verified Twitter user. He's somewhat of an internet celebrity, and I've seen him tweeting things like, "Hey, LeBron James, tweet me back." Like he now thinks he's the big wig of Twitter. Kind of funny. Anyways, more power to him.
Celebrities are made and unmade quite quickly in this environment of ours, at least the one we're looking at.
Other most retweeted tweets were Pennsylvania State University offering 15 cents for hurricane relief for every retweet. Ariana Grande responding to the Manchester shooting.
That I have also noticed.
And Barack Obama signing off. So he made 2 of the 5 most retweeted.
Which, again, I like to think of social media as some form of democratic space. And this is something that we have also looked at quite a lot. And I don't know how our listeners feel about it, but I think there is a lot of potential there that is not yet exploited too much. And the fact that there is a variety of voices out there and that they all get to express themselves, including the chicken nugget person, but also Barack Obama, right? Like these 2 people would never be in the same report about anything. And nevertheless, social media allows this hierarchy to be a little bit more flattened.
Number 1.
So
it
gives me some form of democratic optimism. And again, I'm sure some of you would criticize me for this, but I want to look at it in an optimistic way.
Democracy through chicken nuggets. That'd be a great paper.
You have the title already.
So, most retweeted activist hashtags.
What do you mean by activist?
This is what Twitter claims are the most activist hashtags.
Okay, their definition.
These reports are very vague in their methodology.
Yeah.
But I can say that the first 2 are different. They include multiple variations. So the first is resist, and that includes also things like resistance, which makes sense from a activist perspective.
Which is also connected to those initial movements, women movement, the Women's March on Washington. It had the hashtag resist.
It did, and I think it was also applied to other contexts. For example, the Dakota Access Pipeline. Resist.
In Romania, remember, I had the privilege of being a guest interviewer in one of the
guest host.
That's the way to put it. There you go. In one of the Social Media and Politics podcast episodes, and I interviewed one of the organizers of a Romanian anti-corruption protest campaigners, and their hashtag was resist, written in Romanian, carried like with a zeta instead of an S, but borrowing, basically. And I think this is another point towards my transnationalization idea, the fact that we can see some appropriation of hashtags. Something that was made for an American context, but resonates well with some other contexts, can easily travel and be appropriated.
Definitely. And what's interesting is I do think it's mostly in terms of Trump and probably most around his inauguration and also with the quote unquote Muslim ban and these types of things. So resist was number 1. And then the second is Make America Great Again and different variations of.
Is that considered what do you call it, an activist hashtag?
That's what Twitter says. But what's interesting, so number 1 is anti-Trump, number 2 is pro-Trump, and then we see the same in number 3 and 4. Number 3 is hashtag impeach Trump, and number 4 is hashtag Trump train. So you have basically the top 4 hashtags, 2 are pro-Trump and 2 are anti-Trump, which brings into the idea of polarization, right? On Twitter.
Yes, this on Twitter and elsewhere. This is another academic keyword, or maybe not just academic. I think polarization.
It's all over the place now.
Has been. It's a phenomenon that we observe through precisely these measures. I actually wanted to do a little spin on what you just said and say that in Europe, or at least initiated in Europe, one of the most popular hashtags and most popular tweets was from a European politician and a French one at that. The new president of France, Emmanuel Macron, basically took a stab at Trump and criticized Trump's and the United States' intention to leave the Paris Agreement on climate change cooperation by proposing that United States and other American scientists and other scientists should move to Europe, where they can research on climate change without being politically interfered with, and proposing writing a meme, I think, which was called "Make the Planet great again. And that was, I think, the number one tweet of President Macron in France and one of the most recognizable slogans of 2017, make the planet great again. It doesn't appear on your top 10.
No. Let me just go quickly through the last 5. There's a little bit of polarization, but mostly left-wing hashtags, so which makes sense for the Twitter demographic, right? Hashtag Women's March, hashtag Not My President, hashtag Black Lives Matter, hashtag No DAPL for the Dakota Access Pipeline. No DAPL.
Oh, DAPL.
And then 9 and 10 are interesting because they take different sides on the NFL controversy, the National Football League, about taking a knee or not. That was started by Colin Kaepernick. So number 9 is hashtag Take a Knee. And then number 10 is boycott NFL. So 2 different sides on the same issue, which obviously Donald Trump weighed in on this and made it very visible in the public sphere.
These are very American hashtags, if I may say so.
This is in the U.S.
These are most retweeted American.
Yes, most of these reports are.
Then it makes sense because I would have imagined some other numbers. I think the make the planet great again would have been a pretty good global choice.
Yeah, I don't think they reported the global trends, or at least I didn't find them.
Again, this is my focus on transnationalization. My first gift. What was your first gift again? What was the name?
We're still on my first gift.
We're still there.
The recap, but I'm moving quickly through. So, top 3 tweeted world leaders, and I think this is across the world. Number 1, Trump. Number 2, Narendra Modi from India, and the third, Nicolas Maduro from Venezuela.
Yeah,
which
he was the top third most retweeted. Did I understand correctly?
Most mentioned.
Most mentioned.
Maybe not by
Friends
his handle,
of his.
but no, I think it's just in response to the protest down there.
I was thinking that this may not be a sympathetic mention, but again, this is my supposition.
So. Briefly, we'll cover Instagram 2017 year in review, which is completely not political at all. Top 3 most liked posts. Well, the top 10 only involve 3 people. That is Beyonce, Cristiano Ronaldo, and Selena Gomez.
Who's Selena Gomez?
I don't know, but she's pretty popular.
God, this does I'm not 16 anymore.
No. Top hashtags, hashtag love, fashion, photo of the day.
I knew that hashtag love has been the top hashtag throughout the history, I think, of Instagram. I think it's very interesting. A positive hashtag.
Most Instagram cities apropos transnationalization. We have New York, Moscow, London, Sao Paulo, Paris, Los Angeles, St. Petersburg, Jakarta, Istanbul, Barcelona. So really all over the place. And they also have a list for the most followed pets on Instagram. The number 1 is a Pomeranian from the U.S. named Jif Pom.
No Japanese? They used to be great on pet things. No.
Yeah, there is one. A Shiba Inu. I don't know what type of dog. Is that a dog?
Yeah, I think so.
At Marutaro.
Marutaro.
It links you right to his profile. Let's check it out.
Let's check it. It's a cutest dog.
Looks like a Welsh Corgi or something.
No, it's one of these foxy dogs. How cute.
Anyways, that's...
So, Instagram is not for politics.
Side note.
This is my comment.
I have a friend, Sean, who... started an Instagram account for his dachshunds, the wiener dogs, and he got so many likes. It was ridiculous. So,
Hi, Sean.
So Instagram, not much political activity there, which I mean, I think you can't really hyperlink through Instagram. You can't. I mean, you could take a screenshot of a story. You can't share.
You have to install a different app if you want to Regram or some other. There's a couple of competitors in that field. But
so
anyway.
That's kind of the recap of the most shared political stuff on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
So what's your conclusion? Like if you were to summarize, looking at all these.
My conclusion is
tops.
I cannot believe this guy with the nuggets was number 1 and beat Obama.
The power of the citizen, apropos women power. And citizen power. This is the other thing.
Yes, definitely. But I think I guess the takeaway is Facebook is the most social media, just as its profile is built on, about community, getting people together around crisis moments, around things like the solar eclipse, around protests. And Facebook has these functions like events and ways to, and I think it relates a lot to the idea of social ties. Again, going into the academic context,
stuff,
that your Facebook network is mostly built of people you know and or your close friends. So communication there is very personal. And something I'll get into in my second gift, but let's not get there yet.
You inspired me to take my third gift as my second.
Okay.
All right. Are you ready?
I'm ready.
Well, I want to make a little prediction and say that perhaps Facebook is not the place for politics in 2018. So again, my gifts are all future-oriented because I like to peek into this crystal ball and see what happens. And as you look, at the year in review in a proper sense, I'm looking like the year ahead, and I'm thinking that political information on Facebook or politics in general on Facebook may not be as dominant as you just said it was in 2017. And why is that? One is the scandals. And the other one is digital architectures. Again, for the initiated, you may have heard of this experiment that Facebook has been running in 6 different countries, minor populations in terms of the size, in trying to isolate news from personal posts.
Right, the Explore feature.
Taking
it from Instagram and putting it on Facebook, basically.
And that may have, again, from a digital architecture point of view, it will have major consequences for how politics can be seen, accessed, interacted with on Facebook. The optimistic me that was saying before, democratic Facebook, citizens on Facebook, whatever. This may not be the same in 2018 if this Facebook Explore happens. Basically, if I understand it correctly, what it would mean is you'll have 2 separate feeds as a regular user. On one hand, you would have your friends' posts, and on a separate tab, so to say, you would have news from advertisers or paid content, and you would have news from the pages you subscribe to, and some other general information type of posts. That would definitely reduce the exposure. I mean, not definitely, but it would have a higher likelihood that you, as a regular user, would reduce your consumption of news. And so that would make politics not so welcome on Facebook anymore. So maybe, and I'm again provocative this time, right? Maybe Facebook is trying to get rid of all these controversy that got it into the Senate hearings and all that, put into the spotlight in a very negative way, by isolating this very contentious type of activity, which is politics, away from the entertainment, culture, and personal news that people often want to share. Yeah, we got some comments. I cannot see much of mine.
Let's see. Something about algorithms designed to channel people to products down the marketing tunnel. Algorithms. That
could be another keyword. But it's connecting to the digital architectures. And basically what I was trying to comment on is political information is that you would have 2 different algorithms. One that would promote personal content, which is something that Facebook specifically deplored, the decrease in the amount of personal content posted on the platform, and the prevalence of a lot of paid content. I think, again, inviting our listeners to consider these matters, how much personal content you see in your everyday perusing of your Facebook feed, perhaps 40% at best.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of still being thrown around. There's a lot of talk about these echo chambers, right? Is social media a place for echo chambers? And the idea is that if Facebook gives you things they think you'll like, then they'll basically figure out what your political profile is and then serve you news that you already agree with. What seems to be more happening is that people's offline friend networks are so diverse that it's beating the echo chamber effect. So my classic example I always use is that if you go to a bar and you meet someone, you may friend that person. You may not know that person is a green activist, and you may not be necessarily a green activist. But because you friend that person that night, the next day, they're posting things, they're prioritized in your feed because you're a new connection, and whatever that person is sharing is what you're going to be exposed to. So I think the idea that algorithms are driving people into funnels is a little bit too tech deterministic. Studies show people do seek out other opinions. They may be doing that so that they're better prepared for an argument. But the echo chamber thesis seems to be pretty much stomped out.
Exactly. I think several pieces of research, including some recent ones coming out of University of Amsterdam, demonstrates, I think, quite well in the case of news consumption that algorithmic recommendations are more diverse than human recommendations. So echo chambers are basically counteracted by algorithmic strategies.
And this also has something to do, I think, with the introduction of reactions as opposed to just like. So
when was that happening? Do you remember when that was
I want to say
happening?
2016.
Yeah, I want to say last year.
And so if you get a piece of news, let's say you very much dislike Donald Trump and you get a piece of anything mentioning Trump, you might put the angry face. And I don't think the algorithm actually pushes that away versus if you didn't react, if that makes sense. So if you leave nothing, the algorithm probably won't show you more of the same news. But if you leave an angry face, you're still interacting with it. And I think Facebook will then serve you more of that
I think
content.
generally the idea behind algorithms is that the way they are designed to work is to see what is this user's interest. So if they react at all, it means they're interested in that topic. The algorithm doesn't necessarily judge how you appraise that topic. So if you react with love or with anger, it doesn't matter. It means that this is something that you're concerned with.
I think a love would be factored higher than a like.
Hey, Facebook.
If anyone's listening. Okay, so gift 2?
Gift 2 for me was that a prediction that political information is going to decrease on Facebook because, one, Facebook feature, Explore. 2, this kind of cautiousness that it has been called to exert because of the Senate hearings and the interference of Russia and all these other stuff, which maybe get to talk about. And 3, also because there's a certain, apropos polarization and what we were talking about earlier, maybe there is a certain degree of, a certain desire, I should say, of users to log off politics because it's so polarized and so contentious that perhaps is not a good idea to be exposed too much to it. It would be something that users wouldn't want to be involved with. So less Facebook and politics.
I would add one more to that, which is just general saturation. People just, I think 2017 has been just so much politics in everyday discussions, in the news, also on social media. And I think people are getting tired of, they get saturated. And we've seen this also looking at comments to Brexit campaigns on Facebook. And what we find basically is that there's a point, people start commenting very actively and then they just drop off. They just get fatigued, basically. And I think the same thing's going on with politics on social media.
Comment and involvement fatigue. I think basically we watched this phenomenon or surveyed this phenomenon over time, and the numbers may look increasing, but the actual users change because one person can only do that much. Afterwards, your batteries are spent.
But I don't know if political discussion will decrease on Facebook. I think that these companies are riding the Trump wave.
In a sense, I feel very guilty for dedicating so much airwaves again to this man. There's more to life than Trump, and there's more to politics than Trump. And nevertheless, everyone, including ourselves here, seems to focus so much on what he says, even though the consequences of what he says are very minor.
Yeah, so go and get some chicken nuggets.
I vote for that guy. I already forgot his name, but I so much support him. Citizen power.
Yes. All right.
Your second gift. Now it's your turn.
My second gift is phishing.
Phishing for?
Phishing cyber attacks. So what do I mean by that? We all know of this idea of spear phishing, which is basically when you get a malicious link in your inbox that tricks you into giving some information. This is pretty standard stuff, kind of classic Nigerian scam, so-called. And I'm going to get into the type of phishing that I want to discuss, which is angler phishing. But first, the reason I thought about this in terms of the year in review was, do you remember the massive worldwide malware attack called WannaCry?
Lund University was a victim of it, the university where I work. So I do very well remember that because it affected the admissions process at our university.
Yeah, so it did a lot of damage. Basically, if you don't remember, I think it was about 4 days to a week that this thing was just moving through in terms of transnationalization, the internet and infecting computers. So what it would do is it would get into your computer, encrypt your files, lock up your computer, and demand $300 in Bitcoin within 3 days.
In Bitcoin.
Or $600 in Bitcoin within 7 days. Otherwise, it would say you can't get your files back. And Europol estimates that WannaCry infected 200,000 computers in over 150 countries. Russia, Ukraine, India, and Taiwan were the most affected. So Lund University was also affected in its admission system. But there was a lot of concern because it also infected parts of Britain's National Health Service, the NHS, and computers, MRI machines, blood monitoring systems were affected. So pretty nasty stuff with some human consequences. But it actually wasn't a phishing attack. Everyone thought it was. Apparently, it was infiltrating vulnerable public-facing SMB ports, which I have no idea what that is. But apparently, it just went through loopholes in different operating systems. But what I want to talk about is angler phishing, which is different from spear phishing. So again, spear phishing is the malicious links in an email. Angler phishing
I'm not familiar with the technical term.
Is when a cyber attacker creates a social media presence faking a company, a customer support account, and will say, hey, this is Bank of America, or this is your bank, or this is...
so gaining trust.
Gaining trust and saying, we had some problems with your account. Can you give us your account number and we'll look into it, blah, blah, blah. And this basically happened to a official in the Pentagon. And also something like 10,000 computers in the Defense Department back in March. But what is interesting in terms of social media is that cyber attackers can basically observe your behavior on social media to see what you're likely to click on. So they might see that you like certain bands or certain sports teams, and then they can phish you with links that they know you're likely to click on. They can monitor your public information. And I think it brings in this idea that people on social media are pretty trusting, right? It's seen as kind of a safe space where you're discussing with your friends. You're not thinking about malicious cyber attackers who are collecting data on you to phish you. But let me give you the one story of the Pentagon official, because this is really interesting stuff.
May I ask you, what's the purpose? Is it just money, extraction of money? Is it blackmail?
Well, in this case, it was Russian operatives trying to hack into Pentagon computers.
Okay, so
which they successfully did. So there is a company called Proofpoint. They are a cybersecurity firm who monitors this stuff. And according to their third quarter report, phishing, in terms of spear phishing, the malicious links is pretty much unchanged. But angler phishing attacks had doubled. So I think we're going to see a lot more of this. But let me tell you the story of the Pentagon official. So the New York Times reported about this back in May, and they didn't target the official. They targeted his wife.
Oh, so subtle.
And what they saw was that on Twitter, she was discussing what to do with her kids in the summer. So an angler phishing account basically created or sent her links about a vacation package that she clicked on because they knew she was interested in doing something with her kids. And then the attacker was able to get into the Pentagon official's computer through their shared home network.
Clever.
Very clever. So
this is it's another way of looking at micro-targeting.
Exactly.
It's another facet of this phenomenon of micro-targeting. So you can definitely see that this is for regular advertising, and it's also for political advertising, but also for these malicious purposes, subversive, if you want, advertising.
So, I mean, it brings into questions about how do you train public officials to be aware of this? It's not something that they really can control. It's their families, it's their kids they're targeting to get on those home networks. So I think we'll see more of this. It also occurred in the French presidential election. So Reuters reported in July that at least 24 Facebook accounts were created to spy on Emmanuel Macron campaign officials.
Exactly.
Posing as friends of friends to try to gather information. And Facebook told U.S. officials that they might have done this to gear up for a type of angler phishing attack.
I think there are different techniques, but they're all aiming at the same type of ultimate purpose, from what I understand. I think in all over European elections, we had the same type of pattern. Macron and the French election subversive attacks were not very successful, apparently because they were quite aware of what happened in the American elections, and they kind of built up for it. If the myths are true, when the servers of the Macron campaign were hacked, apparently, again, from a Russian IP address, but again, you cannot always trust these, they've also planted some files that were laden with misinformation. And when that got spread over the internet, they said, hey, we caught you. You actually were the victims of our plant. So again, now we'll see like kind of a war. Who is getting who is more adept at tricking the other, but definitely micro-targeting plays a role.
Russian elections are coming up, and they will be contested this time around, which is very interesting to see what the U.S. response will be. I think we'll hear more about these angler phishing attacks in the future. But we have a question from the live stream from one of our previous guests, Sergey. Hey, Sergey. Do you think the FCC Internet Neutrality Bill 2017 will have any impact on the rise of corporate propaganda in 2018?
Oh, Sergey, thank you very much for bringing the net neutrality on the podcast and the future orientation of the podcast.
Just as we were recording, this happened, what was it, 2 days ago?
Yeah, and 2 or yesterday.
Yeah.
I think today is Saturday, and I think it happened just yesterday. Again, I wanna just say, first of all, that this is only U.S. based. Okay, so let it all be very clear. I know a lot of focus of internet regulation lies on the U.S. and Trump focus is also steering us out the U.S. But outside the U.S., this is not the case. So in the European Union, which means the 28 member states or 27 plus one, whatever Britain's status is, we have definitely net neutrality. And I was reading up on this just as I was coming over to Copenhagen just to double check my numbers. It's definitely there. It's been introduced at the same time as the rules were introduced in the United States, probably because of this strong cooperation between the U.S. and the EU at the time in October 2015, and they have just been reasserted in the EU. So there is a guarantee that there is no differentiation of companies or users by internet service providers, these ISPs. So it may, the question was about, do we see a lot of company propaganda? It definitely can happen in the US. At the same time, because the EU has these very strict laws, it's still in place, and because the EU laws, interestingly enough, apropos my first point on transnationalization, are valid wherever European information is stored. This can pose some very interesting legal challenges. Basically, if European servers should be affected by the FCC decision to abolish net neutrality, then they will have a legal conflict. Because they will have the European law and the US-based law that would be at odds. And that would be a very interesting thing to take to the court, and which I'm sure they will.
Yeah, to be honest, I haven't been following this debate that closely. I've been thinking about it, or I've been reading a lot about different podcast groups that have been saying, are they going to be affected with the speed of streaming podcasts, which I hope not. For our sake, but I'm really not sure. Maybe there's an argument to be made that some services should get, like more popular services should have higher access speeds.
De facto is, and it says even in the European relatively strict regulation formulation, is that depending on the context, more or less bandwidth, because this is basically what we're talking about, can be accommodated. So, for example, should there be a natural catastrophe, a lot of bandwidth would be allocated to sending messages back and forth from that region in order to address those emergency issues. And the same with super high, super loaded traffic in one direction. There will be allocated enough bandwidth so there's no obstruction of access. But there will be no active discrimination against, so to say, more obscure sites.
Yeah, and I don't know, because I know this has obviously been a very contentious issue for some people who are very concerned about net neutrality and internet privacy more broadly. I don't really think it's in the internet service provider's interest to be caught doing these types of things. So I think there is a market-driven reason for them to kind of maintain the status quo. But really, time will tell in that situation.
Yeah, I don't have any more comments to say, but as a principle, I don't think it's a democratic principle to have a market-driven access. I think net neutrality is a more democratic way to look at it, and from that theoretical point of view, I would be a supporter of net neutrality as a rule. But de facto, we know Facebook will always have a lot of bandwidth because a lot of people democratically choose to use that at the expense of some other service. So.
And I've seen Bernie Sanders in particular posting very, very aggressively against this. So I think this will be an issue that will be definitely politicized in 2018 for the Democrats.
Yes. Shall we move on to
Gift 3.
Gift 3? Keyword artificial intelligence.
Oof.
Yes, I had to bring it up. The big question is, in which way artificial intelligence will interfere or affect, I don't know what is the better verb here, with social media. And again, the ever optimist, if I am to apply a self-label, I want to think of AI as positively affecting the interaction between users on social media. So I'm thinking that we could think in the future, not too distant future, of a way in which chatbots, so artificial intelligence algorithms that will be able to interact and interfere or come in, join conversations for positive purposes. For example, to quiet down trolling and flaming, to reduce polarization and foster a friendlier, if you wish, discussion online. Because again, research clearly shows that there is a tendency for things to get heated, and in particular for women public personalities, apropos your first topic, women, in particular for women politicians and women public personalities, there is a tendency to have them exposed to very fierce, unjust attacks. And so my prediction, my gift of artificial intelligence that I bring to the podcast would say that there will be an increased role of AI, and that there will be chatbots that will moderate conversations so as to reduce this kind of threatening kind of conversations. And if I have the chance to elaborate a little bit on this, I want to say that this is not something that just cooked up in a moment of particularly optimistic feeling, but it's something that's based on existing trends. Have you heard of an app called Coco?
No.
How about an app called Kik?
I know Kik.
Kik and Coco, they sound great. They have a lot of Ks.
Sounds like cereal.
Kik is a chat app, let's put it this way in a brief way, mostly used by teenagers in the US and elsewhere. And Coco is a very small app that was primarily developed for therapy. For mental therapy. So if you have a problem and you want some feedback from another user, you can post your problem on Coco, write a message, and there will be another person trying to interact with you and give some advice or support.
A trained professional or just?
No, you don't know, a user. The interesting part, and I'm going to try to keep this story pretty short because I'm sure there's lots of more things to say, but there's a cooperation between Kik and Coco because Kik could not deal with a lot of the very negative and eventually suicidal messages left by teenagers. And actually, just to draw attention to this, suicide is the number one cause of death among teenagers in the Western world.
And there was a case also this year where a girl was tried and prosecuted for text messaging her boyfriend to kill himself, and he did. Which
is, again, just talking about it makes me extremely, extremely scared, but definitely how you interact on social media, including this app, Kik, but any other app, can be a matter of life and death. And Coco is an app that allowed users to give each other support, but also because in a cooperation with Kik, we're connected to this artificial intelligence learning algorithms, was able to create a Coco bot, which is the sweetest name bot I've ever heard. I want to talk to a Coco bot just because it sounds cute. But if you log into a Coco app, you'll be greeted by a Coco bot. And the Coco bot has been trained on all these messages, personal messages between users in the Coco app, so that it can pick up on signals of suicidal tendencies and other negative feelings. And it can provide, so is the bot that provides some form of therapy is too strong, perhaps a word to say, but some form of alleviating ways of dealing with a crisis. And it can be something very banal, like, I'm not liked at school, I'm not popular, my boyfriend left me, or my girlfriend left me, something like that. But it can also be like, oh, my dad is an alcoholic, he beats my mom.
I smell a massive lawsuit.
Actually, it's not. This is actually happening in the US, and it's very successful. And it's one of the few examples where AI has been trained to almost pass a Turing test. So these Coco bots are so well versed because it's such a pattern that it's easy to recognize, and the words and the type of behavior that they are trained on are pretty standardized. So they can actually positively interfere and be helpful.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a nice training set to have, definitely.
Which includes millions,
yeah.
right, of conversations.
But I think it also speaks to this idea that we like to think of ourselves as very individual and we all have our own preferences. But I think what social media algorithms and political micro-targeting has shown is that people can be sorted along preferences.
I'm afraid so.
So
in clusters.
Yeah, but I mean, it's nice to know that there are some positive
uses of micro-targeting, if you wish. You could basically these Cookerbot. I cannot stop saying Cookerbot. The Cookerbot can identify negative patterns of emotions, and there's a training manual, a playbook, if you want. If you identify self-harm tendencies in users, say this. And if you identify a very, very high level of emergency, they can be immediately referenced to a
law enforcement.
Exactly.
Yeah, I think chatbots, that's super interesting. I think chatbots are going to be led by the private sector. So I think customer support, things, I think you can already do Facebook has piloted these. I don't know how widespread they are. But
did you ever interact with one? With a chatbot?
Well, it's hard to know because a lot of customer services...
They're so good that you don't know.
Yeah, you don't
Are you
know.
talking to a human?
It's like, hi, I'm Lisa. Let me help you buy your train tickets type of thing. I used one of these, but it was a real person. But yeah, because it's hard to tell whether it's a kind of outsourced, customer support center or is it a chatbot. Now, I know there's an interesting example. I was at a workshop on combating anti-Semitism online, and I was reading up a little bit on this, and there was, who was it? I don't remember. It wasn't McDonald's, but some large corporation put out a chatbot just to kind of experiment with it, and it was basically co-opted by trolls to make it start spewing racist, anti-Semitic propaganda.
Yes.
So
I've heard of such failed experiments before, where bots were trained on Twitter data, and they also turned Nazi propagandists.
Exactly. So
what the problem with AI generally is what you put in is what you get out. And the advantage of Coco-like AI bots is because of their specific nature, they can be trained on proper data. So how to help others. The purpose of Coco is to help others. So you have a very specific subset of interactions. But do you think that... do you agree with a declaration by none other than Vladimir Putin of Russia, who said the one who will dominate AI will dominate the world? In my own words, but I think that's basically what he said.
I do know.
There's like an arms race.
Yes, there is an
AI.
arms race, and there is a super interesting. I heard about this on 60 Minutes. Have you heard of a drone swarm?
No.
A drone swarm are small, cheap plastic drones that are deployed in swarms, so in large numbers, from F-16 fighter jets that basically use machine learning and AI to direct themselves and move as a swarm to a target. And so, for example, I mean, these could be fitted with explosives, but what they can also do is they can identify terrorists. And the way they do this is they scan pictures of the wanted terrorist or the suspect. They get as much facial recognition. They feed the images to
the input.
The
right?
input.
Yeah.
And then what these drone swarms do is they go and basically they fly around different war zones and they identify the terrorist based on facial recognition. So then you might say, well, what happens if that person is wearing a mask, right? Terrorists wear
oftentimes
these type of ski masks, right? So what they train on is the distance between the eyes.
Jeez.
Because you have to see, so you can't hide your vision. I mean, maybe, I don't know what if they would have some sort of like sunglasses on or something, or goggles, yeah. But they basically can move as a swarm and you can shoot them down, whatever, but there's too many of them. They're little plastic helicopters, basically. And then they will go and they'll identify a terrorist based on the distance between their eyes. And then from there, they can call in an airstrike. They could blow up the drone. And this basically, on 60 Minutes, was the final test, and it passed. So it's deployable. So I think in that sense, there are
security reasons. And this is, in a sense, a very interesting trend, if I may say, both what I and you said right now, that point towards a almost securitization of research on AI. So if Putin is right, then we will see an arms race in research terms.
I think we are.
In trying to do anything from face recognition to voice recognition, voice manipulation, interference in conversation, and basically creating cyborgs or bots, either or, that can wreak havoc in the adversary's social media work or even offline.
And in terms of the future of fake news, there are some researchers, I believe it's a German team in Stanford or somewhere out of Stanford that is basically they've made a program or artificial intelligence program that can take a video of someone talking and project that onto George Bush or
project? What do you mean?
So they train the machine on how, let's say, on a bunch of Obama speeches, and then they can basically have a person talking and then project Obama's face on that person.
Oh my goodness. So basically they can fake.
So you can create videos that would share online of something a politician didn't say, but that technology is basically there. And their argument was, because they were obviously questioned, should you be doing this technology? And their argument was, if we know how to create it, then we know how to identify and reverse engineer it.
I've heard of Adobe Photoshop for voices. So it's the same thing. Like you can, in Adobe Photoshop, I think everybody knows, you can totally change one person's physical appearance. And now Adobe, the same company, has developed a way to deal with sound so that you can entirely modulate another voice on your own. So if I wanted to sound like Barack Obama, I could Adobe Photoshop my voice. So instead of me, you'd hear Barack.
Cool.
Anyway, time is running probably, so I suppose it's time to look at your third gift.
Third gift. My last gift has to do with the Senate hearings with representatives from Facebook, Twitter, and Google.
This is going to be hard to keep short. What are your main takeaways, though?
Main takeaways, yes, there's a lot. First of all, the impression is that senators and legislators are extremely upset. They have been saying that they have been telling these tech companies about this since the beginning of 2017 and have not gotten a sufficient response. And it also brings, there's this famous picture of Obama and Putin at a G20 summit a month before the American elections, where we kind of knew this was happening. So their question is, why? Why is nothing being done about it? So two main points I took away in terms of what were the Russians actually doing. So I watched these Senate hearings and learned a lot to kind of clear up, Russian meddling, Russian interference. What does that mean? Basically, there's two broad categories that we could assign this to. One is voter suppression. So Russian troll farms were spreading messages that you could text to vote for Hillary, for example, very much in the same infographics that her campaign was running, which is illegal by United States law. You can't stop someone from going to a polling station.
Yes, this is the most controversial and has been controversial already in 2016. So this is like a continuing trend.
Exactly. But 2017 is where this information started to
reached
become
Congress.
public.
Yeah.
And the second is voter manipulation. And what's interesting is the strategies that Russians used to influence not just the election, but more broadly, just to create division in the U.S. And I'll talk a little bit about that in a second. But they very much used micro-targeting techniques or techniques that a politician or a brand would use. And so what they would do is they would use sponsored ads to target certain groups of people. And they would do this along racial and religious lines. So they would have one group called Black Matters, obviously playing off Black Lives Matters, and another group called Back the Badge. Right, so putting people together, or they would have
what was it? Heart of Texas.
Heart of Texas, the home of guns, barbecue in your heart. That was their tagline, and so they would target, for example, people living in Texas whose interests were patriotism or independence.
Yes,
and then they had another group called Muslims for America, and regardless of what the page was.
And these groups, just to clarify, these were groups created from outside, most likely by Russian agents, and they were created in order to polarize the society.
And through shell accounts. So there's no way to trace actually who purchased these ads. This is something that legislators are not happy about. And what they would do is they would target certain groups in order to get them to sign up to the page. And then they would send them very non-controversial content. So Muslims for America would get just inspirational quotes from the Quran. Heart of Texas would get things like if you love Texas, and they'd have like a picture of cowboy boots. But then over time, as the election got nearer and also after the election of Donald Trump, they would start doing things like creating events that one group would get Stop the Islamization of America, and the other group would get Save Islamic Knowledge. And they would have the event at the same time, at the same place, in order to pit these two groups together.
If I may comment very quickly on this, I find it, again, very effective, right? And social media lends itself easily to this type of polarization. But it's a tactic that the Soviets, if you want to see the Russians as a successor of the Soviet Union, the Soviet Union has used this against its enemies during the Cold War.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so it's nothing new.
It's nothing new. It's just basically social media, I believe we can say it amplifies or it brings even more opportunities for this type of behavior. But the tactique is exactly the same, to divide et impera, right? The old Romans used to say the same thing, divide and conquer.
And so to be very clear, it wasn't about getting Donald Trump elected. And we know that because, for example, this Black Matters page created a rally called Not My President that took place in Union Square. And that was the most effective.
In New York?
Yeah, in New York, bringing in 5,000 to 10,000 people actually protesting based on this group. And what was interesting is that people who actually went to these rallies were surprised to find no representatives from those pages or those organizations there because they were in St. Petersburg. So you can go and check out those videos on YouTube. There's a couple other takeaways. One that I thought was interesting was the Twitter representative kept stating that less than 5% of accounts on the platform are bots, which is much lower than
what we've seen from other research.
In 2014, Twitter mentioned that it had 14% of its accounts were bots, and then revised that number down to 8.5. And one of the legislators was basically like, can you submit later for the record why your assessments consistently fall lower than the 15% that everyone else gets? So that was interesting. And because we're kind of running out of time, I'll just mention that a few senators also mentioned that this is not just in the U.S., but also taking place in France, Austria, Germany, Netherlands, with elections there. But they stated that it was more overt in Europe, whereas it was more covert in the U.S. And their reasoning was that in Europe, they argue that there's more Russian sympathizers, so they don't have to kind of cloak behind hidden movements. But generally, these Senate hearings provided a lot of light into what the Russians were actually doing. What do we mean by Russian interference? And essentially, they all said, Google, Facebook, and Twitter, investigation is ongoing. My guess is it's only the tip of the iceberg, and it's still going on today.
Do you think this will lead to stricter regulation when it comes to transparency of political advertising on such social media platforms?
Well, I asked Dr. Daniel Kreis this question in the last episode of the podcast, and I think he was right in his assessment that most regulation will come from Europe.
Unsurprisingly,
the U.S. will be watching, but basically, and something else he said in that interview was interesting to me, which is we're at a point where when politicians are campaigning, they don't understand the technologies that they're using to get themselves elected. And I think this also came very clear in the questions from U.S. officials. Basically, they don't understand what's going on. Even if they wanted to, they couldn't do anything about it. So I think and Dr. Kreis said this, and also the representatives said this in the hearings, is that they are going to work closer together and create more industry standards, not Facebook versus Twitter versus Google, but sharing data and basically policing not just their platforms, but also the industry more broadly.
I believe the trend towards regulation is something that I so-called predicted last time, and I think it still holds. On May 25th of 2018, we'll have the General Data Protection Regulation coming into force. GDPR, which is an initial acronym set many will have to confront from the mid-2018 in the EU, but that, again, has transnational reverberations around social media world. That has to do with privacy and the rules about privacy and against surveillance that are very strong in Europe, and that probably the United States would also have to take some form of position vis-a-vis.
And we should say that there are initiatives from there's a bipartisan bill moving through. It's very early in the drafting stages from Senators Amy Klobuchar, Mike Warner, and John McCain, so 2 Democrats and a Republican, who would try to make more transparency in the advertising that goes into these platforms, especially from political campaigns. So there are some initiatives, but we'll see whether those will pass. Probably not.
I am actually quite optimistic because it's a bipartisan interest that there will be more control over what's being sent out on Facebook. But anyway, we'll live and see how that works out.
So those were our 6 gifts plus some questions from you guys. So thank you for all who commented. I'd like to end with, and this is something that the NPR Politics podcast does. Every week they do a thing you can't let go. So bringing this to 2017, what is one thing from this year that you just can't let go?
Do you mean in the realm of politics, or do you mean as a personal experience?
Social media and politics.
I've been left with a feeling that there is an increased demand from different political actors to know very much about me and users like me, that I am surveyed, not in an aggressive way, but passively observed, and that there is a separate me, the social media me, that is being somewhat gathered by my trace data. And of course, this has happened all the time, but now it has just dawned on me, my goodness, this is really happening, and I'm one of the data points they're basing their algorithms on. So it doesn't really change anything, but it's just a consciousness, an awareness moment. I'm aware of that more today than last year.
And I think that's the feeling of a lot of social media users, being more careful about.
Did you know there's some people that predict that there's like a social media turnoff, that because of this feeling that I have, but maybe in a moderate way, some other users in a more acute way, that there will be a massive dropout from all social media activity, that people simply say, I can't take this anymore. And you've read also these former Facebook executives that come out and criticize the addictive behavior inbuilt in the platform design and all that stuff. And hearing about this and having this feeling, do you think that would lead to like a massive decrease in the active use of social media?
No,
me neither. I don't think so. I think that should be just like part of an awareness. What can you not let go of?
So mine revolves around a particular moment in time, and that would be when Donald Trump called Kim Jong-un Little Rocket Man. Which I just
laugh out loud. Even though it's very sad, it's a sad moment in diplomacy. But yeah, it's funny.
It is funny, and then they responded by calling him a dotard. That just sticks with me as
such an advanced slang.
Yeah,
I was surprised the North Koreans would know. I don't know. It's not something that comes to my mind very easily, but why not?
Yeah. So that is definitely. I just thought it was first of all hilarious, but something I just can't stop thinking about.
I don't want to think about North Korea. The thought of North Korea, it's even freakier than the thought of being properly surveyed.
Let's hope we can have a year in review 2018 on that.
On that happy note.
On that note, but. Yes, Dr. Dutceac Segesten, thank you so much for spending some time and bringing us 3 gifts.
Thank you very much for having me. I could have given even more gifts, but time is only that long.
We have all of 2018 to go. And I just wanted to remind the listeners, if you'd like to give us a gift, you can go ahead and sign up for the Axios newsletter. I have no idea, actually, how many signups I have.
How many?
Over 50. But I don't think we've hit 250 yet. So if you want to sign up for that and help out the podcast, again, the idea is for the 50th episode to interview one of the founders of this online-only media company and talk about the role of social media in journalism. So all you do is click on the referral link in the show description or visit www.socialmediaandpolitics.org and you can sign up through that. I think we got a roll
on our Christmas mood. So I think we just have to say thank you to everybody who tuned in live and to all the listeners. And if you have any comments or feedback, things we left out, things you thought were absolutely defining 2017 and that Michael and I have not covered, just drop a comment on Twitter or Facebook or any other ways to get in touch, and we'll pick it up next year.
Signing off for Anamaria Dutceac Segesten, I'm Michael Bacetto. thanks for tuning in, and see you next year.
Bye.
Ho, 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 ho.